Welcome to this week's edition of Charting Change in Legal. I am Ari Kaplan, an analyst that covers the legal industry, and I'm here with.
Caroline Hill. Hi, everyone. I am editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider. It's great to be here, Ari. Nice to see you.
It's fantastic to see you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person in a couple of weeks, and it's been a very big week in legal and in legal tech. There's been a lot of money flowing. There have been a lot of developments. I think that people are getting very excited about the space, which is always fun to see. And with several events coming up this summer and the fall, I think there's a lot of discussion about what's happening. I have to say that I was interviewing Alex Smith at iManage yesterday, and he said something that I thought was very poignant. He just said, "Listen, we have moved from the era of sort of fascination, I'm paraphrasing, to the era of practicality. And nobody is trying to write a legal brief in the voice of Shakespeare anymore. They're not using ChatGPT to do silly things that are on pure experimentation for the sake of seeing if it can do it. They're trying to hammer down where are we using technology. And I think that what's been so interesting is that as people consider all of the new use cases for the newest technology, they're starting to realize that there are foundational tools that they're not really optimizing or taking advantage of. So it seems to me like a lot of interesting developments and a lot of sort of forward momentum in legal today.
Yeah, so for example, I suppose everybody will be familiar, but Harvey raised $100 million, which is an incredible amount, and it's achieved unicorn status. So it's been valued at over $1 billion, which for a two-year-old company is just incredible, right? And I think that it's really interesting. I had a demo of Harvey just the other day. It's great to see that amongst the Gen AI, particularly the prominent ones where there's been a little bit of mystery. Some people who haven't been early adopters have been unable to see what the product is. I think that's really changing, and that's great to see. There's a maturing already of those kind of early Gen AI companies. I think there's still a kind of nervousness around those metrics in terms of speaking to people in the investor community about what it means for their revenue generation. So there's a nervousness around this sort of bubble that we have in legal tech around Gen AI. So in order to justify those kind of numbers for Harvey, and I haven't seen their balance sheet, so I am not speculating as to what they are or they aren't generating, but these are big numbers for a two-year-old company. And I know they are doing really well, right? So they've got CMS, they've got McFarland's, they've got Allen and Overy was one of the very early adopters. They've got a ton. They've got Ashurst over in the States. They've got a bunch of companies that are firms that are using them. But I do think I sense from people that I speak to that there's either this, that there is, I agree with Alex. It's great to see that shift from what was the word you used to practicality? So
The era of fascination. He used a
fascination,
different
right?
word, but this
Yeah,
sort of era of amazement
yeah,
and wonder. He said if we've moved from the era of wonder to
yeah.
the era of practicality, and he's someone whose guidance you can trust because he's been doing this for a really long time, long before it was popular, and while people were still trying to figure out what was happening. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge and listen to the experts who've been in this space and understand the fundamentals and understand the layers on which these tools are built, as opposed to kind of newer voices that don't really have a lot of substance. If they don't, I mean, I think that's a real challenge for people to interpret who's actually familiar with this space and who's just excited to talk about it, which is fine. But there's guidance, and then there's like real expertise.
But so, and we should probably say Alex. I don't know if we said that he's
I
at
said Alex Smith that I manage. Yeah,
you say I manage. You'd say
yeah.
I manage. What an Ari. Um, is your lunch sponsored by iManage?
My the virtual lunch is sponsored this month by iManage, and I'm very happy about that. But he happened to be our guest, and I would have had him regardless of the company that he worked
He
at.
is great, and I think he's
Yeah.
great. So the other valuation, the other big number, and this was extraordinary, is a company that you and I both know well. So Clio raised $900 million, all right, which is just the most incredible amount. And what is really cool to see about that, and I was again speaking to somebody in the investor community that's talking about, so Clio has moved from, so they were kind of practice management system challenger, um, built in the cloud, so came straight out of the gate, sort of a native cloud product. They've started really with small law firms, and then now they're with this, particularly with this, they've been creeping up the value chain in terms of the size of the firms, and they've been doing really well in that sort of small to mid market area. And I think with this new investment, we're going to see them sort of really try and increase the size and the revenue of the firms that they're dealing with. And what's really interesting, cloud has come up, so that's obviously a valuation story, but also a kind of cloud story. And I think what's kind of fun for us journalists, like we talk about cloud as if this is a done, it's not a conversation, right? It's not interesting, we're kind of done. But within that space, actually cloud is still quite a big deal, and I've written a couple of things. So we've published our own practice management report within the last week, and we've written about Clio. And I think, and also the other interesting, we had a big exclusive about Clyde and Co moving to the cloud with Elite 3E, and talking to people at Clyde and Co and Elite. It's a really big decision, right? Like we kind of go, oh yeah, it's so obvious. But for firms, particularly in that space, in finance management and practice management, it's still a big decision, right?
What I took away from some of these things, and what I always sort of look at when I see these significant rounds of funding, is the sort of incredible way that these leaders, right? You're talking about two totally different leaders. The CEO of Harvey, which has been around for a fairly short period of time in sort of legal tech years, and Clio, which is really an established leader in the space. But interesting to see these leaders execute on the vision that they set out, whether they've done it rapidly, whether they've done it incrementally, but amazing. I mean, I have a more experience with Jack. Obviously, I knew him in the early days, and they were kind to support my books and other early initiatives. And so, but just I feel like I routinely now will see something on LinkedIn and had maybe as you have maybe talked to that company 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 2 years ago, and my comment is always very similar. It's always like, wow, amazing to see you bring your vision to fruition. It's not that easy. They make it look easy, and it seems like it's easy. And there's all this money, and Bob Ambrosi put together a great resource of just showing all the different raises. Over the last seemed like over the last few years, he was going with the top raises, but actually they were mostly recent raises, and was just a signal on how much money is coming into the space. But the leadership aspect, I think, shouldn't go unnoticed. People should acknowledge the fact that these leaders are really tasked with something incredible, and they're delivering. And I think that is pretty momentous. And it's not unlike law firm leaders that are figuring out, or GCs who are figuring out how to take a responsibility to lead and grow and expand, and doing it in a way that really shouldn't go unnoticed, because it's quite remarkable.
It's definitely, it's yeah, I mean, to go on that, Jack, because Jack Newton at Clio, he's obviously been doing this for quite some time. I have so much admiration. He's so smart. I love talking to him. In our industry, we've got some smart people, but then you meet people who are just sort of, they just seem to have that vision. And I have to say, Jack is one of those people. But yeah, so to get from, there's a lot of startup activity in the sector, but there has been for a long time. But I think, this with Gen AI, obviously that seems to be accelerating, and it's hard, for it when you're starting out, to get from what takes you to 5 million. I was again, I tell you who I was talking to was Gabby Astura's, who founded Belfield. You know, she's a serial entrepreneur, and she sold her businesses to she sold e-billing hub to Thomson Reuters. She sold um uh what was the one I just said? She's done multiple sales anyway. She was talking. She's just launched a kind of a newsletter thing for startups, leveraging her knowledge of the startup world and of being a serial entrepreneur. And she was saying it's really hard to get what takes you to 5 million is not what takes you to 20 million. What takes you from 20 million is not the same sort of skills and people and everything, you know, as takes you to get to 50. And then by the time you get to these really big numbers, okay, you've got almost like a tried and tested formula that you know works, but it's still a challenge, right? To get to the next stage, it takes different, it's just different, right? It's not always the same.
Well, also, and I really try to look at this from a different lens. Like I'm not privy to a lot of the numbers. So aside from the valuations and the amounts, I am really looking at what's the lesson? You know, like that's what I'm always trying to figure out. What's the lesson if you're not trying to raise a million or 10 million or 900 million, and all you're trying to do is to incrementally innovate or drive sort of productive change or just enhance your career a little bit, right? So I'm always thinking about that. And so when I see some of these individuals and they're in the news, I try to like break it down. And you mentioned Jack, like he's, not only uh, obviously great leader and quite bright, but he's like a genuine person, right? And I think that there's a certain humanity that I think is remains essential in terms of success, in terms of leadership, and this sort of idea that technology is taking over. There's still that one hurdle that technology cannot, may never overcome, which is the sort of personal, the touch of some kind that really matters. And I think that in legal, it's starting to, as much as we've passed the excitement phase of whatever is going to transform the profession, I think we've also re-embraced the idea that the humanity of it all is essential and will drive us
Trust
forward.
you are to come up with a really nice view on it, right? Like, so there's me. So if I had to, if I had to look at it, I would be like, I would somewhat agree. Like, you know, in the service, do you not agree? Somewhat agree. Like, I suppose I agree, but I'm concerned a little bit about all the investment. If you look at the goal, right? So for your end user, if we put the law firms or the corporate legal teams at the front now, right, and say, right, what's their needs and their objectives in terms of the software that they're going to be using, right? That should really be where we start as in terms of, is this software going to meet their needs? And then you start talking about all of the money that's coming into the sector in terms of the private equity. I'm not saying that that's always a bad thing. They bring with them huge amounts of expertise, and you know, sometimes they're really needed to get to that next stage because you need the money in order to develop the product, but to bring in the people, it's you know, it's just the two go hand in hand. But you know, I do think that people are watching with nervousness in some case, or just awareness in others, just the amount of private equity money that's coming in, and just saying, how do we make sure that the two objectives, the objective to have great software at the right price, is consistent with all this private equity money coming in? I think that people are watching that. And that's not to take away from your humanity. I suppose that's a different point, but you know, whereas for you it's a lot about the people, and I do get, in terms of the internal leadership, I get that. I do get that. But I think that we're maturing, and with that comes so many more things. And have you got a great leader, right? I suppose that's the point that I was making.
Yeah, and I think that it makes perfect sense that we have this point counterpoint. It's sort of the journalist and the analyst, right? Like I'm meant to be Switzerland, and so I try to look at it through that lens. I will say though that I have in a lot of my interviews come across more often than in the past people who will say in the context of maybe a conversation about a technology trend or a process trend, reveal to me that they are part of a pilot or they have been invited for some type of proof of concept. And organizations that encourage buyers and prospects and friendlies to to test out something new and engage them in a meaningful conversation about how they can be better. Because I often hear from those people, there's a need. We like this tool, or we like this tool combined with that tool, but there really is a need for something more. And I'm so glad to see this company trying at least to provide something more rather than only what it set out to provide in the beginning, and that's it. And I think that that's one trend that I hope people will talk about and share in very practical terms at the upcoming ILTA conference. And of course, there are several events this fall that I expect people to follow up on, because you may remember last year at ILTA and of course at all the other fall conferences, there was lots of discussion about the beta release or the launch of something that was now incorporating some very early stage generative AI. Well, we're a year into it, from that from last summer, certainly more than that as an industry. And I think that it will be interesting to hear where people have found success, and I hope they will also reveal where they have faltered. We hear so much about fail fast, and I was at an event at Lexpo, and there was a great presentation about forget about fail fast, fail better.
Mm,
And we can only fail better if we learn lessons from each other in terms of how that failure occurred, what mistakes we made, and it will be wonderful to be able to share that. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. And I have to say that I've gotten several emails about the disco microphones that we have talked about. So to our surprise, people are listening, and they are then referring back to something I said or you said or a plan of action. And I just thought, oh man, people, I thought this was just
I
you and
haven't
me.
ordered the
Yeah.
disco
Yeah.
microphone filter.
Well,
We need
we'll
to
have
do
to
that.
coordinate that. So that's
Coordinate it. I'm going to send you a picture of the one that I'm going to order.
well,
It's going to be pink.
nice. I'll have to figure out. I want to get mine. Mine's gonna be all glittery. And that's some people ask me all kinds of questions about it, but I will not answer any of those questions today, because this has been an exceptional episode of Charting Change in Legal, and I have enjoyed it too much to start talking about my Amazon purchases. So Caroline Hill, a privilege to chat with you as always. I look forward to speaking again, maybe a pre Ilticon call, and
Perfect.
I think that we'll
I'm
have a
going to
lot of
be
fun with it.
chasing you while you're running. I'll be chasing you with the microphone, going,
I,
Ari,
I
come back. We need to talk. We need to talk about it. And everyone...
run, Ari, run! Wonderful.
All right. I look forward to it. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.